Welcome to Talking Pictures, a podcast where two good friends share their love of movies by diving into what makes the stories and characters we love so great. Hi, I'm Brian Collins, and I'm here with my co-host Dan LaFab, and we're going to talk about the movies we love. Today, we're going to chat about the movie Okja. Dan, we'll start off with you. Let's start off with, when did you see this movie first? I know I recommended it to you. How long ago was it that you saw it?
It was just about a week or so ago that I watched it in preparation for this, and that I hadn't seen it before that at all. When you recommended it, I had never heard of it. To be completely honest, that first time that I watched it, I fell asleep.
Plus, you watched it multiple times.
Yeah, so I did go back and watch it again, and that was my fault. It was late, and I was like, oh yeah, I could watch this. No, but I did go back and start it all back over again, because since I fell asleep, of course, Netflix assumes that you watched the entire thing and doesn't remember your position where you fell asleep.
But so you have to start from the beginning.
Had to start from the beginning. How about you? I mean, you recommended this, so had you seen this many times before?
No, I'd only watched it once, and I think I probably saw it about a week before our last podcast, and I recommended it. One of the reasons probably that a lot of people hadn't heard of it is because it was an exclusive Netflix original, and it wasn't released in cinemas, in movie theaters in the U.S. or around the world, for that matter, which caused kind of a stir at the Cannes Film Festival, because it, along with several other movies, were nominated for Best Picture in that film competition, the Palme d'Or. It's kind of stirred up some controversy because they were never released in French cinemas. And some people were getting pissed about that, going, how can you put a movie in the running that hasn't even gone through the theater system in France? And of course, I'm sure there were money issues along with that. But
the first of many. I mean, Netflix has some great content out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's only going to increase.
Right, and I think they're eventually going to have to change the way that they vet films and what things films have to meet, what criteria they have to meet in order to be considered. And I think with HBO, Netflix, and Amazon, and all these other companies who are making this great content, this great series and movies, they're going to have to rethink that. But yeah, I saw it not too long before I recommended it to you, and it came out in the summer of 2017. And just on a whim, we were just scrolling through. I saw it in the Netflix queue and dialed it up, and I was really, by the end of it, once I found out, who the director was, he's a really great up and coming South Korean director named Joon-ho Bong. He switched his name around in the credits for Okja in this movie for some reason. I'm not sure why, but his name is Joon-ho Bong, and he is South Korean. He's really popular. Tarantino has called him, like Steven Spielberg in his prime. Like, he's a real big fan of this guy. And that I loved Snowpiercer, which he was also another movie that he made. He's made The Host, and one called Mother, I think. And I'm not familiar with his whole videography, or filmography.
You were sold at Snowpiercer, weren't you?
I mean, that was a great movie. Yeah. So that's just a little bit of background on the movie and him, which isn't much, but anyway, it had a very compelling story, like Snowpiercer. I could tell that there were similarities in the style of the movies, and the thematic elements of it too, I thought were similar in a way.
Yeah, I could see that.
So I don't know. He's pretty awesome. I think pretty talented director and writer too. He wrote the screenplay.
Oh, he wrote it as well as directed.
So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned this story kind of aspects. What about the storyline of the movie stood out to you?
Well, I think overall it was well written in that, for example, it had the ending of it, which I'm going to assume, a spoiler alerts in this that you've seen the movie, but I'll try not to in case somebody's hasn't seen it yet. But the end of the movie, if you remember, when it comes full circle back to the little girl, the main character's village, and where she lives with her grandfather, I think was a nice device to sort of give it a circularity, that it ended in the same place. I love the ending shot. So I think it had a really good structure to it. There were nice contrasts the whole way through, both within settings,
Yeah.
and within characterizations. Different characters, I think, were nice contrast to one another. Of course, you had the little girl and her grandfather who come from this rural, poor, um, uh, close to the land culture,
Yeah.
traditional culture, and you have that juxtaposed with and contrasted with the more urban areas of New York City. Once they get to that part of the story, and they have Okja and going to take it in, I guess it's a girl. I never thought about it if it's a girl or a boy. I think it's a girl.
Yeah.
But it's a good question what the gender is. But once they take it into the processing plant or whatever. I thought the characters are really nicely offset. You have this sort of duality going on with I have to look up the names of the characters. Tilda Swinton's character, Lucy Mirando, and Nancy Mirando, these sort of twins who are kind of opposite in their worldview. You have one who's this more, I don't know, Silicon Valley liberal type, who's green, who wants to give the company a fresh start and takes over. And then you have her sister, Nancy, who's this more cutthroat, capitalistic, opportunistic CEO, doesn't take any bullshit and just wants to make money. You have those. And then you have some really cool, I think, characters like Jake Gyllenhaal's character, Johnny Wilcox, who's this kind of has-been Steve Irwin-esque character, who's like a TV personality. And I guess contrasted with that might be, I don't know, maybe the grandfather, or that character Frank Dawson. I think he's the guy who is kind of Lucy's main go-to. He's telling her what to do. He's her main advisor.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And it had that wonderful scene where he's talking on the phone to her sister Nancy, and he puts the phone down. You can see that he's called her.
Yeah, you can see through the glass on the coffee table, or whatever. Yeah.
What a great like sort of conceit on how to reveal that information narratively through that visual, right? That was really cool.
Yeah.
So all in all, I just thought, I even gotten to the message of, our relationship with nature, the differences, the sort of pro ecology and pro green and side of that message that he's sort of promoting here. And I think overall the story was balanced also in its critique of the different perspectives and sides of genetically modified animals or genetically modified foods. It's obvious that the Mirando Corporation, right, is just kind of a satire or a fake pseudonym of the Monsanto Corporation, which is constantly criticized for creating Frankenfood and this kind of thing. So, there are cultural references that are interesting to examine and that he's using there. But we can talk about the message later. But overall, I think that was I thought it was just well put together from those different aspects. Yeah. What about you?
Well, kind of what you mentioned there, something, I guess the first thing that kind of stood out to me was it's very clear who the movie portrays as good guys and bad guys, but if you kind of think about it a little bit more, it's almost, are they really bad guys? Like, I mean, they're basically faced with world hunger and trying to end world hunger. And so then as the viewer, you're trying to ask yourself the question of, is that really, are the bad guys the ones that are trying to end world hunger? And is it horrible that we're trying to do that? I mean, the way that they're doing it, yeah, sure, with genetically modified foods and treating animals the way that they do. But it kind of poses that question to the viewer, I thought, where it's, are you okay with that if it means ending world hunger? And I can't even think of an answer to that off the top of my head. But I mean, that was the kind of the question that I thought they were trying to ask throughout the movie, is because they keep talking about, that Okja being a super pig is kind of going to be an answer, to world hunger, and maybe very marketed up. Unfortunately, the only time that we really see that as the rationale behind it is through a lot of the Morendo Corporation's marketing and such. So, take it with a grain of salt for sure, right? Marketing speech. But I thought it was a really interesting question because, it's one of those things where, not to get too deep into, away from the movie, but, it could be a very real situation where, we obviously have hunger in the world now, but, down the path, if things continue, with Earth resources being consumed faster than they're replenished, if we hit a point to where we need to come up with a solution for world hunger on a global scale, are we okay with ending that at any means? And I mean, that's a very hypothetical question right now. Not something we're going to answer on this podcast. But that was something that kind of stood out to me there. Something else that stood out to me was the use of the Animal Liberation Front. Now, to be completely honest, I'm not real familiar with them. I've heard of the ALF, but the only thing I've really heard is just kind of bits and pieces here and there. When you, I don't know if they are, but I kind of, in my mind, I equate them with something like PETA, where you hear about how they've done some horribly violent things, and in their minds, I'm sure doing good, and I'm sure they do a lot of good for animals and such, but doing it in a way that is very violent. And so again, it's kind of that question of, are they, if their end is art, or if their end is to end animal cruelty, and they're okay with getting to that end by any means, how is that any different than somebody like the Morendo Corporation, who's trying to end world hunger and doing so by any means possible? I mean, I just see that great contrast there between the two different groups, and it's very clear, like I said, that one of them's the good guys, one of them the bad guys in the movie. But I thought those were really good contrasts between those two types of institutions.
It's interesting you bring that up, the Animal Liberation Front, because I had no idea that was actually a real organization.
Oh yeah. They again, I'm not real familiar with them, but I've seen things where they will like break into test labs and free the animals, and do things like kind of similar in the way that PETA would throw paint on fur, that kind of stuff. But then ALF will go into test labs and break out the animals and free them. And if anybody gets in their way, as far as I understand it, they're do whatever they need to do to free the animals. It's all about the animals.
Right.
Which is good cause, but it's like
I'd heard of these kind of organizations, but I assumed that the ALF was something that he had created, sort of like it's not the Monsanto Corporation, it's the Morendo Corporation. So I didn't know it was actually a real organization.
Yeah,
with a
sure.
real website, which I'm looking at right now. This is really interesting, because I think that you make a good point about the portrayal of both of, let's say, these two sides. You have the corporation that wants to create a product that they can make money on and solve world hunger. You have the other organization and how they want to protect the innocent animals. That there is, by the end of the movie, there's obviously a good side and a bad side, but it doesn't mean that either side went without their own critique, because
Right.
I think it was obvious that the ALF and the way that they were organized, which was fairly bumbling in a lot of instances, right? It
Yeah.
was very, it could be very selfish. So they lied to the little girl about taking Okja back. They resorted to violence in the end, both within their own group and outside. And that it seemed like that they were in it as much for the organization's sake.
Yeah.
You have that when the leader, played by what's his name?
I don't remember. I've seen him in other things though.
Yeah, I can't remember. He's the guy who played in There Will Be Blood. He played the preacher. Oh, he's so great. I'm looking on, what's his name? Anyway, he gives that speech about the ALF. This is not the organization's way. When the guy, he finds out that he lied about what he told the girl, and then he beats the living shit out of him.
Yeah, yeah.
and says, you're no longer part of this. And so you have those moments, and it seemed like almost everybody in this world that was created was out for something else, was out for, it could have been, the organization, like the reputation of the organization, the vision of it.
Yeah.
On their part, it could have been completely for money and capitalism, as it was for Nancy Miranda. It could have been for her own egotistical reasons, that Lucy had, the ways she wanted to restructure the company and make it this thing that she wanted.
Uh-huh.
Or it could be even the grandfather, who sort of had his own ideas about how he wanted her to grow up.
Yeah.
Everybody was out for something else,
Yeah.
except for her.
Yeah.
And she just wanted to go get her friend, So
Right.
you have this really strong familiar relationship of a small child and their pet. So it has a lot of echoes in all the stories that we, traditionally children's stories, like Old Yeller, Where the Red Fern Grows,
Right.
or To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a very coming of age story with your pet, who you love. Charlotte's Web. You realize that they have to die, that they're not your friend, but they're a source of they serve a practical function as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that there were lots that message about critiquing all of these different motives on both sides. I think you're absolutely right. That in the end, the LF was sort of part of being the hero of it, but it wasn't because that they were pure of motive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or ability.
Yeah. Paul Dano is the guy's name. Plays Jay.
Paul Dano.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of talked a little bit about the storyline then. What did you like best about the movie? Was there anything in particular, like, out of those elements we've talked about, or maybe something else that, if you had to pick one thing, would be that one thing?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the story goes, I think I like the familiarity of her in a relationship with the pig. The coming of age story I thought was nice. I think overall, what kind of struck me was how it part of the movie was like a children's movie. Like I said, I listed off all those other movies that are traditionally aimed at a juvenile audience, right? Because they have characters that are young. But we love them, whether it's Huck Finn or, like I said, To Kill a Mockingbird. these young characters who see the world for the first time, we love to do that. We love to experience the world again through a younger character's eyes. I liked it. So it had this sort of fairy tale like feel to it, right? Because you have this sort of mythical large creature that nobody's ever seen before, and it's romping through the woods and through the jungles with her. And then at the same moment, you'll have, this isn't a children's show necessarily.
Oh,
right?
no, not at all.
Because there's, you'll have these idyllic moments that are contrasted with very, very serious themes. Whether it's just someone, saying fuck, or whether it's someone getting the shit beat out of them, or a lot of violence. So there was and they come at it like a punch in the gut almost. And you're not quite, other critics might say, well, the movie didn't seem like it knew what it wanted to be, which I found the more fascinating part of it. I liked the fact that I didn't know where to put this thing.
Huh.
It seemed to be all kinds of things. A heist film, right? A coming of age film, social commentary, science fiction. I liked that. It sort of kept you on edge all the time about what it was supposed to be. And you could be both that kid that liked those certain aspects, and you could be the adult in the same moment almost, who enjoyed the more serious, profound themes that it presented. And I think other than that, I really enjoyed the VFX. I thought the VFX were really, really good.
Yeah.
Because I felt for that animal. They made that animal a real character for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really well done.
I would watch it, and then I would watch for shadows, and I would watch for textures and that. But if I didn't give a shit about that stuff, I would have, I was still sucked in and felt the closeness that was intended, I think. So that to me is kind of the litmus test.
Yeah. Yeah. They made a character out of ones and zeros.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's where you can really tell.
And whoever did the mocap on it.
Just get a super pig, put it in a mocap suit, right?
What about you? What'd you like best about it?
I think it's as simple as it is or was. I think for me, it was that connection between Okja and was it Mija? Is that right?
Yes. Thanks for saying. I keep saying that little girl, but yeah, it's Mija.
Yeah. The connection between those two, because like you said, she just wants to be back with her friend, and you can tell that throughout the entire movie that it's just love between them that keeps them wanting to be together. And kind of some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, there's these huge, massive questions that the movie raises, serious questions that the movie raises, and then it just kind of all comes back to this love connection between a little girl and her pet. And that to me was something I found comforting, kind of between, all of these massive questions that, are ones that I think it's important to think about and try to, maybe even how would each person, answer those questions. But, in the end, it is, it's a love story between a little girl and her pet, and she just wants to be with her pet that she loves, and or her friend, I think to me that was the part that I liked best, because it did kind of bring it back to, I've got pets, and so it's kind of just a very comforting aspect of the film, that I could kind of find throughout all of those big, massive questions that, to be completely honest, I hadn't really thought a lot about. And so it's, when you're watching it, it's disturbing, and you always kind of know, that kind of stuff is going on. But it's still comforting to know that they're there is something good out there, if that makes sense. Not to get too deep with it all, but that's that part of it kind of really struck a chord with me. I think I like that best.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying about that connection and relationship, and how it was sort of the anchor of the movie, and the emotional crux of the movie.
Oh, for sure.
And that most people, especially our age, would be taken back to the time when we had our favorite pet growing up, and the relationship that we established, and how it was different from the relationships that we have today, which I think is a major theme of the movie, a major question of what is our relationship with nature now, and what is an appropriate one. You have two very different sides of this, represented by the ALF, who is so I think there's a critique of the left, certainly, in that group and in that character. You have this overly idealistic leader, who, sometimes his idealism gets in the way of practical things that he needs to do to make things work. They could have taken Okja back, but they didn't. They had this fucking crazy ass plan to sneak her in. Like, they're so inept that they can't get a fucking camera in there, and so they lie, and they
but they expect the plan to work. Right.
You have that. You have one of the characters, can't remember his name. He's one of the guys. I think they were like a homosexual couple or something. The one that wouldn't eat.
Oh,
because he was so committed to this, he wouldn't
even eat a tomato. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he's taken this to an extreme to where his relationship with food, in this instance, was absurd.
Yeah.
Right. He was willing to die. Well, what kind of sense does that make?
Yeah.
To sacrifice your own self for something else. Isn't that just the opposite of what you're trying to do? Right.
Yeah.
But and then on the other side, you have Lucy, right, who could give a shit about anything except for money.
Right.
And in the end, the only way to deal with her is through the means that she understands, and that is gold. And so she buys Okja from her,
right?
And she understands that, right? And that's the most effective way to go about this. So yeah, I think there's a lot of critique on each side, but it ultimately is about our relationship, which she and her relationship with Okja is the sort of ideal.
Yeah.
It's not any of these other things.
Yeah.
Just because we could make an Okja doesn't necessarily mean that we should.
Right.
That takes some wisdom to know the difference. It's one thing to say, well, we could feed everybody if we did this. And it's another to go, well, maybe we shouldn't do it. Maybe we should look for something else. Maybe there are other causes to this that could alleviate the problem without going to this extreme. Maybe it has to do with income disparity. Maybe it has to do with foreign policy of governments.
Yeah.
Maybe it has to do with the rise of dictators in third world countries. All of this that could be attacked, that could be problem solved in other ways other than the capitalistic solution of let's make more shit. Right?
Yeah.
Let's make more stuff so that we can sell it.
Right.
I think at one point, one character almost says that verbatim or something.
Do they really?
I think it's Lucy who said, something about they'll eat it. If it tastes good, they'll eat it. They don't give a shit where it comes from, or something.
Oh, I don't know, but isn't that Carl's Jr.'s slogan? If it tastes good, eat it.
If Okja gets all over your face. But I definitely get what you're saying about the relationship. that her relationship with Okja is sort of a microcosm of what he's holding up as the ideal relationship, broadly speaking,
Yeah.
of humanity's relationship with nature in general.
Yeah.
And that there are sides, both in capitalism and in, activism, where this relationship is kind of it's bent, it's warped, it becomes out of balance in a way because it becomes absurd.
Yeah.
And she sort of represents the middle.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah. I mean, yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's why I really connected to put that on with the connection being the theme, but connected with those two characters in particular and kind of throughout the entire movie.
Well, since we talked about what we like best, is there anything that you might change that you saw opportunity? Whether it was, did you not like a particular character or situation you thought was superfluous, or what?
Yeah, I think, and as much as I think he did a good job, I just didn't really understand Jake Gyllenhaal's role. It started to make sense kind of midway through, but in the beginning, like there was almost, I don't know. It just I didn't understand what he was supposed to be doing. I like being that he was played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and maybe this was my fault, but usually when you see somebody who's like the big name role or the big name, right, you assume that they're playing one of the main roles. And so I expected him to play a much bigger part, and I kept kind of waiting for that almost. And I mean, he's there throughout a lot of it, but he's kind of pointless. I mean, he's kind of there for some comedic stuff and, kind of like you said, kind of a, TV personality and, kind of being the face of the corporation and that side. But so it does kind of play into the story that way. But as far as a lot of the messages and stuff going throughout the film, I thought his was probably one of the least or one of the smallest compared to a lot of the other characters in the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's sort of how I took the intention of this character. You said he was pointless, and I think that's absolutely the correct response to his character, because he was pointless. He was supposed to be this expert, right? And it turned out that he was just exploitative. He was all about himself. He was all about his own brand and being the face of this company, and in his own ego. But aside from that, he just walked around and made stupid comments. He wasn't even liked by Lucy, right? Yeah. He was he was impotent. He understood that. I mean, you have that scene where the rape scene, right, which we haven't gotten to yet, but where right after that, he has this sort of drunken tirade where he unloads all of the stuff, and he's swinging the bottle around and talking about how this place is I can't remember what he called it. He said this place is defiled, or it's warped, or something. And he's talking about this facility that he's in and what he's doing. And this is right before he gets that meat sample and shoots Okja with that gun or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have that wonderful shot of the meat searing in the pan. But I think you're right. He is sort of a character. He's kind of a fool. He's a jester that's not very funny. He is sort of emblematic of the off balance of this relationship. He quite literally is off balance. He's constantly swaying back and forth and almost falling down, whether it's he's drunk or he doesn't know how to sit. Yeah, remember that where he's in the office or in the conference room, and it's right after they arrest the girl, and Lucy gets really upset, her advisor comes over and talks to her and makes the coffee, and then he comes in, right? Jake Gyllenhaal's character, and he doesn't know where to sit.
Yeah.
Right? He keeps sitting on people. He keeps putting his hand on somebody's head, and these are kind of funny moments. But I think overall, it sort of shows that he is sort of represents this unbalance, this disturbance in the force, if you will, and he's completely interchangeable. Like they well, maybe you're not the face of the company anymore. This little girl is now, and then it just throws him for a loop. He can't take that, right?
Yeah.
But I think your response to it is absolutely correct. I think he was meant to be seen as that,
as being pretty much pointless.
Yeah, I mean, as important as any face of a company. As pointless as Trump's name is,
Yeah.
right? He doesn't sell real estates. He sells his name, right? He rents his name, or he licenses it to other people, other companies to use, and it serves no practical function whatsoever. Right? It's not. It's a part of the. It's like the marquee of the building.
Yeah.
It doesn't hold up anything. It doesn't support anything. It's the same as a brand, right? And it's pointless. You could just take it down and put it up and put a different one up. It wouldn't affect the building at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's sort of what to me, that's kind of what he was. He was the marketing side of capitalism.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, an idea.
What about you? If there was something you could change about the movie, what would it be?
I think I would have lingered a little longer at the end when she got back home. Just a little bit. I really liked the ending, but I wanted a little bit more.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the very, very last scene before the credits roll.
Remind me.
She and her grandfather eating on the floor of their little hut, and the baby Okja.
Oh yeah,
is over on the left, and you see Okja's big head in the window behind them.
Yeah,
I thought it was a great shot, great composition.
Yeah,
and he held that scene for a long time. You know, all they were doing was eating, and this stuff was kind of moving around. I know that's kind of a silly thing, but I just wanted him to hold that shot a little longer. I just liked it so much.
Yeah.
Let's see. Car chases. I don't know. I'm not a big car chase guy, I guess. I mean, after the Blues Brothers, everything else has scored that downhill, so to speak.
Okja versus Blues Brothers car chase.
I don't know. Overall, I think most of the parts were functioned correctly. I think for what I took them to be.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more character development. Here's one. I would like to have seen more interaction between the sisters.
Lucy
and Nancy.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that he could have explored that literal dichotomy.
Yeah.
Between their different personalities a little more. We got a little bit of that at the end when she talked to her sister about their father at one point. I think maybe that could have been driven home a little bit more, given Tilda Swinton a little bit more time to develop those on screen.
Yeah, I could say that. It almost seems like when Nancy came, because Lucy was there the whole time, and then when Nancy comes into the picture, it's almost like, oh wait, who is this? Like, why? I didn't know there were sisters. I mean, you know that they had mentioned Nancy before, but I didn't put two and two together until well into the movie that there is this relationship between the sisters going on, and so I could definitely see that being something that could have had more screen time to kind of show and explain a little bit better.
Yeah. To me, again, just to go back to what I feel like that their purpose, the two characters' purpose were, and then that they were twins. They were sort of literally two sides of a corporate uh, motives, plans, or I'm not sure what I want to say. You have one who's very cutthroat, and you have one who's very culturally conscious of how the yeah, it's corporately conscious. That's what I mean of how her business looks, right? Is viewed by people. The other one wants to make money so she can pay the investors, and that's how the world works. Damn it! Um, and I think that it could have spent a little more time contrasting those because you had. I think that it was a critique of both of those approaches because you had one who had pure motives, which would be Lucy, the one that was running the company. She had pure motives, but she wasn't effective. And then you had the other one who had really shitty motives, but who was very effective. And it's like that's where we're at now in this country. I think is it sort of represents late capitalism. Is that there's no middle ground there. Or at least we don't hear about it.
Yeah.
It's how can we be both responsible to the investors and responsible to our communities and have that balance?
Yeah.
There was no middle ground to them. I think intentionally by him. These were two extremes of that. And I think that was a really, really good opportunity to give some more interaction between those two characters to kind of heighten that a little bit and put it to the forefront. Not to be, you didn't have to be preachy with it, but I don't know. I think there were just opportunities there.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
What was your favorite character or characters?
Well, I mean, it's not going to be much of a surprise. Okja. I mean, I've got, like I said, I've got pets, 3 dogs. So I think anybody who has pets or loves animals, I think, like you said, they did a really good job of animating Okja and really turning her. Okja's a her, right? We're going with that.
We'll go with that. Yeah.
Okay.
She had that one big teat.
Well, I mean, they did a really good job of just, she's just an adorable animal, a pet, a friend. The scene in the beginning where Mija almost dies. That was, and then Okja comes in and saves her. It's one of those things that, even though that only happens once, you kind of get the sense of growing up, they did a lot of wandering around and they just looked after each other. And that's, again, it kind of goes back to, the thing I like best about the movie, the connection between those two. And even though I think the actress that played Mija did a great job, I think Okja would be my favorite. How about you?
Yeah, I suppose so. Probably Mija.
Yeah.
I suppose probably because I could identify with her character more. And I think I was supposed to, because I liked her motive, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
It was sort of pure. I mean, she was the one we were supposed to root for. I think that Okja as a character brings up an interesting point for me about this movie, and something that I struggle with about animal rights and just animal lovers in general, is that, there's this critique by some people who say, protecting animals is important, especially, from abuse, just outright abuse. But then at the same time, there's so many human animals on the planet who need tending to, who need fed, who need love, and it's a common criticism of PETA or the ALF or something. It's like, why don't you put some of your energy into adopting humanity as you do this? Which, I mean, I understand that, It's something that I kind of struggle with on this, in this area. And I think that you see that sort of implicitly with the choice of making Okja a super pig. I mean, that was done very carefully because it could have been a lot of things. It could have been a cow, super sheep, whatever. It could have been a plant, right? But of course, those wouldn't have functioned as the way that I think he wanted them to.
No.
I think he picked a pig because pigs are commonly connected with humans. We get transplants from them. They're said to be extremely intelligent animals. And a lot of animal activists, promote the idea that animals do think and feel, that dogs and cats and things, they understand, they have emotional intelligence and this kind of thing. And that I think that he picked a pig because they are connected to us because of the other stories like Charlotte's Web. I mean, most Americans are familiar with that. And so they would make that connection too. But if it had been a plant, it wouldn't have been as impactful, right? I mean, it has to have that face. It has to have the face that can make the expressions. And it really brings up the point of how much do we project onto animals our own feelings, and how much do animals actually feel? This is a big debate about that. And I think both sides have good arguments and good reasons to be skeptical of the other, because as humans, we do that. We do project our own emotions onto animals that they may or may not have. And so if it had been a plant and they had made a super eggplant, right? And she played with it, and I don't know.
Eggplants are the kindest of the plants, don't you know?
It could have been a big oak tree and have been an Okja, but it wouldn't have been as effective, right?
Right.
And so we are, a lot of animal activists, I think, are speciesist, right?
Yeah.
They'll eat plants, but they won't eat animals, and so there's a line there that they won't cross. But if you look at it rationally, intellectually, aren't they the same thing? And they'll make arguments about, whether they're nervous systems, whether they can feel pain and all this kind of thing. But I just found that interesting, because that it wasn't a plant.
Yeah. That
it wasn't something, what's something that isn't as adorable?
Anything but Okja, right?
Right. I mean, the idea, we don't go on and on about all kinds of animals and plants that we do with the fucking pandas, right? It's like the pandas have some special place in our heart. They're like Princess Di. They and we are we're partial to them, that we're not others, right? We like them more. And I think that we don't think about that enough.
Yeah.
That we love animals, but we love particular animals.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said, with the face, right? So, if it's cute, if it's something like, cuddly or, something, those are the animals that we love. And I'm not saying that people don't, because plenty of people do, but there's also plenty of people, don't like lizards and snakes and those types of things. I think because of that same sort of reason, because they're not as cute and cuddly, those are the ones that tend to be, for lack of a better term, the face of, animal movements. And I think that going back to the choice of you being a super pig, I think if you look at the characters, like I think Lucy, as the head of the Miranda Corporation, wanted a character or a creature that could be the face of their their effort, right? Because there was huge marketing stuff throughout the entire film. And, a huge part of that was that, the competition. And, it's not like Okja is being, or it's not like they didn't know Okja was going to be, the pick in the beginning of the movie, but, they knew that they were going to have this competition, and they wanted some sort of animal that people could connect to, that people would be able to see that the Mirendo Corporation is doing a great job. They're trying to end world hunger, and they're trying to do that, and, oh, look at the, cute animal, and, trying to pull on those heartstrings for their own, nefarious purposes. But I think that kind of plays into it. And one of the reasons why they would choose to do something like a super pig, or something that could be seen as adorable, as opposed to a plant or, something less friendly looking. I think as shallow as it seems, when it comes to marketing, you're marketing a product like that, and if you see it as a product, which I think Lucy sees them as products, it's you want it to look good, in order to be able to sell.
Right. It's also interesting that if their intention were to create something to sell that was adorable, it would go against their own marketing efforts, because people would instantly feel a connection to that animal, as we did in the movie, and not want to eat it.
Well, but so I think therein lies the amazing capability of seeing something like in the competition that they had. That, I think, people see that as a competition and stuff, but they don't. It's disconnected from the slaughterhouses, and the fact that is turning into meat later on. Very much in the same way. I mean, you have cows are incredibly cute, right? But there are even pigs, and but there are slaughterhouses just like the ones that we saw in the movie that are horrible places. And I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I kind of got the gist of, Lucy leading that corporation. Obviously, she got there. She knew what she was doing, I think, in picking a creature that could be adorable. Because on the other side of that too is all of that, that whole operation with the slaughterhouses and such, that it happened in cover of night during the movie. It's not like it's always nighttime there, but you got the sense that it was out of sight, out of mind, that type of aspect. And so the public facing front, the face of it all, was this cute pig that, lived a great life. And I'm sure they would show pictures, of where they lived, and, all this great stuff. And everybody would just assume it'd be a happy ending. Not necessarily the case, but that, out of sight, out of mind. If you don't see what's going on behind the scenes, then all you see is the pretty picture that they put on for you. In this case, the competition with Okja.
Yeah, that's a great point. The criticism of not only marketing and capitalism, but also consumerism, and how we're obsessed with competition shows, for example.
Yeah.
This idea that of this warped relationship with nature and animals that we have, I think was sort of epitomized in the very beginning when Lucy does the product launch, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like it comes straight out of something Apple would do, where it's customer facing, everything's awesome, building up the product. This is going to be great.
Ending world hunger. Oh, yeah.
Ending world hunger. There are no downsides to it. We don't want to talk about the sweatshops in China, right? Yeah. We don't want to talk about the production floor where these cute animals are going to be killed. Just trust us. This is going to be great. And consumers just sort of going, okay.
Yeah.
And not really paying attention to what they're eating. I mean, was a pig the best option logically if you're going to genetically modify something? It wasn't about making Okja healthier. I mean, this is pork, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not necessarily the most the healthiest thing to eat in the world. It is
Right.
the most delicious, however.
Well, and that plays a big part into it too, because it kind of goes back to what you were saying. If it tastes good, eat it, right?
Right. Right.
And so I think again, they don't ever address that in the movie, I don't think, but that's one of those things that I'm sure would go into the decision of that, because even if it's not the most nutritious or not the best for you, who cares? It tastes good, right? And that's kind of the mentality, of a lot of that side.
The packaging is cute. The product is delicious. Who cares, right?
Right.
Who cares that if we're going to genetically modify something, why don't we make it leaner? Why don't we make it to where it doesn't clog our arteries? Why don't we make it out of a different animal that would be more practical?
Right.
But those considerations are sort of pushed aside for the appeal to consumers, for sort of a race to the bottom of what consumers want. I don't know, but yeah, it's a great point you make, I think, about the darkness of keeping things, that side of it, the production side of it, in the dark, literally.
Yeah.
And that is a great contrast to, the jungle scenes where they're running around and Okja saves her and all that stuff, and then then it flips around almost 180 degrees to where it's now dark. You're on the killing floor, and now you have the reversal where Mija saves Okja.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. All about contrast, right?
I think so. I mean, and that's one of the reasons I think that it struck me so much, is not only the themes, but I just felt like it was put together well, just like Snowpiercer. I thought it was just a beautifully put together story, well balanced. The characters are great. It's fun. His stuff is funny. That's another thing. I think that his stuff is really funny moments. And then followed up by these horrible moments, these incredibly violent incidences, and it's this constant jarring back and forth that keeps me, on edge. It just makes me want to watch more. I can see how it could be very annoying to a lot of people, but for me, I really appreciate the fact that not only can you bring me through a well-structured narrative that I understand, but it, far from me being sort of complicit in it and being, oh, this is so nice. I'm not. I'm disturbed. I'm jolted. But you have control of me the whole time, and I think that takes a really good talent, a lot of talent to do well, and I think he does it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we touched on the VFX a little bit. Do you want to? I mean, you're the VFX expert. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, like you said, the VFX was amazing for Okja. There were a couple odd shots where it almost seemed like the animation was a little bit off. It seemed awkward, but then you kind of remember that she's a big, bumbling, and kind of awkward animal, and one of my dogs is kind of that way, where he's big and kind of awkward and just kind of tumbles around and kind of does things awkwardly. So I think even in those moments where it could be seen as something where it could be an animation, kind of something seeming off, the difficult part of it is it is an animal that we've never seen before. And so how does one of those move, and how does one of those play? And I think my favorite scene is in the opening with Okja playing in the water, because you have the dynamics between the Okja being a fully CG character, and then you have the fluids of the water. And if anybody's listening to this not familiar with 3D and visual effects, fluids are one of the most difficult things to get to look right. or any sort of dynamics are very, very difficult to do. And they just did a really great job of that. And they didn't shy away from close-ups either. And that's kind of a common tactic for a lot of CG characters and a lot of effects, is to hide things wherever you can. And one way that you can hide things is in shadows, or when it's nighttime out, it's darker, or just pulling the camera a little further away. But there's so many close-up shots with Okja and Mija, interacting together, and that in and of itself, having a real person interacting with a CG character is also incredibly difficult to do, because obviously the character isn't there when they're shooting it, so you have to have the actor that does a great job of making it seem like the character is there, and then having the animators and the team afterwards putting the character in and matching that character's performance to the actor's performance. And it's just I just thought it was really, really well done, especially for something, when you think about it, it isn't, like you said, a Netflix original. And not saying anything against Netflix, but just the mere fact of, when we opened this episode talking about how there was a lot of controversy over being in the Cannes Film Festival, there still is a lot of that kind of stigma around Netflix originals, or Amazon originals, or any of those original series, that the quality is not going to be quite as good as a feature film, the Marvel blockbusters, or the DC comic book movies, or whatever. And
you kind of got that sci-fi channel.
Yeah, you kind of got that vibe to it, and I think this kind of steps up against that, because Okja is just fantastically done. What about you? What did you like about that?
Yeah, I thought it was really well done. As I mentioned before, I was looking for certain things, so I wasn't maybe the average viewer. But even if I hadn't, I wouldn't have noticed anything that would have brought me out of the narrative and go, oh, that looks weird. Most of the stuff, I would watch the water in the background. I would look for the shadowing, and it all looked really great. And I think that Boone, what's his name? Yeah, Bong. Sorry, the director. He was actually one of the VFX supervisors on that, and I think that he started off in VFX. In the industry, and then kind of moved into directing, writing, or whatever, I believe. But he's a VFX guy, and so I think that probably helped a lot with the framing shots and getting plates and
well, if nothing else, it helps a lot, because even if he's not involved in the VFX of this particular film, knowing how the process works, what you need to give that team. Or those teams. Usually there's not just one team working on it, but the shots, the plates that you need to get, the clean plates, the whatever, make sure you have enough room, framing the shot, as far as cinematography is concerned, for the CG character, which it looks fine at the end, but when you're actually shooting something, everything is going to look way off balance, which it goes against everything that, photographers or videographers have been taught, is framing and balance and all of this stuff. And when you have especially a character like Okja, who's just huge, fills up, a lot of the screen.
Right.
And so I'm sure that framing was really kind of awkward to begin with, and probably took some playing around with to figure out, what's the right framing for a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the close-ups too. I hadn't thought about that, but you have some scenes where I think it was Gyllenhaal's character Wilcox who was running his hand along the side of it when he gets there and sees it for the first time at their bungalow, and some great sound effects as his hand runs over. But that was really, really. I mean, that was really a close shot.
Oh yeah.
Contrast that with some of my more favorite ones, I think, there was one shot in particular where it starts out as an overhead, really high angle, looking straight down on her, and she's sitting there, and the camera pulls down 90 to reveal Okja behind her. So they had to get that shot in one take and then make sure that when the camera stopped, it was framed appropriately so that they could get the VFX the way they wanted and keep the. I just assumed that would be very, very hard to do because of the camera movement that is possible.
Yeah.
As you're moving it down from overhead to just a regular shot. I thought that their focus pulling that they did for the VFX, like one of my favorite scenes is when Okja is playing in the background but completely out of focus, and you can see the movements because they're so big.
Yeah.
And you see Mitja in the foreground playing in the water, or just sitting there thinking or whatever. And those are really great.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of those things you don't really think about while you're watching the movie. Mm-hmm. But it is one of those things that you have it. That's one of the big challenges, not just the technical side with a CG character of, making it look real and such, but that's really has to do with the cinematography and, how things are framed and all of that also has to play a huge role in it. You have to know a lot of stuff ahead of time. How big is this character? That's why a lot of times in movies, I haven't seen any behind the scenes on this one, but you'll have either people or something they'll have kind of dressed up to be a stand-in, so that way you can get the eye lines correctly. So when a character looks at what will be a CG character, that they're looking at the right thing, that kind of stuff. Makes for some funny behind the scenes, but it works.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think that's about all I've got to say about Okja. I would highly recommend this movie to most people 13 years or older. I don't know, depending on. I mean, like I said, it's not necessarily a kid's movie because there's some super dark themes in here. But I mean, I'll let my kid watch it, but I'll let her watch anything most. But I would recommend this movie highly to anyone who likes, coming of age films or sci-fi films, or are interested in any of the things that we talked about.
Yeah.
What about you?
I would, with kind of a caveat, because there are a lot of really big questions that we've talked about so far that are asked throughout this movie, and I think because there is a lot of it that's kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of up in your face. Mm-hmm. I think they're the type of topics that you're going to either have people agree with or disagree with, and unfortunately the people that disagree with something or even agree with it, they're not always going to be open-minded to looking at the other side. And so it's one of those things that if I, you recommend it to somebody, you kind of, I don't know, you kind of have an idea in your head ahead of time if they would like the movie. Because there's a lot of things like that, not just the even the political type stuff that we've talked about, but even things like, the mere fact that, you're going to be probably going to be watching subtitles or for a lot of it, or, that kind of stuff. Honestly, I mean, as shallow as it sounds, there's a lot of people that just don't like watching subtitles, right? So little bits like that. So yes, I would recommend it. There's probably a very few amount of people that I would recommend it to because of some of those caveats. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a great movie. So if you're kind of on the fence about it, definitely check it out. If you like movies that are really like well made, I mean, it's a really well made movie. Especially, I keep going back to being a Netflix original. It's definitely worth the time to watch. So I guess I said I would recommend it with a caveat, and then went ahead and recommended it. But but yeah, we've talked about a lot of the kind of stuff that is kind of going on throughout the film, and so I think by now, if you're still listening, you would have an idea of if you would enjoy this kind of movie or not. And if you're in the camp that would, then, or you think you would, then it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people could watch it and just completely ignore a lot of the stuff that we talked about as far as the politics go, and just take it for what it is. But yeah, there's definitely a side there that he's on. I mean, he's not trying to, but it's also very critical of a lot of things. It's not too preachy to me. It seems like it takes a lot of shots at a lot of different sides that you could either agree to or not. But I think you could just watch the movie for the action and the relationships of the character in themselves.
Yeah.
And probably most people, I think, would probably get a lot out of it. But yeah.
Yeah, could see that.
Well, awesome. Well, I've enjoyed this discussion, Dan, as always. What are we going to be talking about next time?
So next time, I decided let's stay with Jake Gyllenhaal. So we're going to do another Jake Gyllenhaal movie. We're going to be watching Life. Have you seen it?
I've played the board game.
All right. It's nothing like the board game.
Like that?
No. So this is Jake Gyllenhaal along with Ryan Reynolds and Rebecca Ferguson. This is the movie where they're up in space. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't really give you an overview or anything like that. It kind of gave me a vibe of almost like an Alien type film. But I haven't seen it, so I don't really have anything else to say about it right now. But hopefully it'll be good. If not, then hopefully we'll still have plenty of stuff to talk about. Sometimes the ones that aren't so good are make for the best conversations.
I'm looking at its IMDb page. It's a horror science sci-fi thriller.
Mm-hmm.
Came out in late March of this year. And yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal, Rebecca Ferguson, Ryan Reynolds. All right, looks interesting. I can't wait.
All righty, sounds good.
All right, man, until next time.
All right, thanks, Brian.